Flying Dragon, The Secret Scroll. Kung Fu has never been this real. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Joe.
I don't really have... Wait, what?
Sorry, I was just going to say, what about real Kung Fu? Isn't that as real, at least, as this?
Well, yeah, I guess, like, Kung Fu is already real, so it doesn't have to, like, get more real, right?
Right. Sorry, go on.
No. I guess
Start
that's a
the
good,
episode.
I didn't have any topic prepared, so that's a good starting point for us here. We're gonna slowly develop the episode from here, and I think that is the best note to start on, is that Kung Fu is real and people should know about it. Dragons, not real, and have arms and legs.
They don't always have arms, but they usually have legs.
God, you do this on purpose.
I don't know what you mean, Mike.
I have no idea either. I think it's time to start talking about video games. I'm somewhat familiar with the idea of video games, more than I am familiar with Kung Fu. But we've played our fair share of Kung Fu video games, and Flying Dragon: The Secret Scroll is like a mixture of two different kinds of games. It's half side-scrolling action game, similar to like Final Fight, or I was thinking for NES specific, Kid Nicky Radical Ninja. If anybody wants to do like a deep pull back, like that game was very similar to this game. But then there's also other stages where it's just basically a fighting game similar to Street Fighter. Now, granted, it's not exactly like Street Fighter because Street Fighter 2 hasn't perfected the fighting game system, so they still have to figure out a way to handle that, and we'll get into that. But I think it's interesting that we continue to see this trend of, like, specifically in 1989, of games being like, no, you can't just be, like, one thing anymore. You're either a bunch of mini games, or you're, like, mixing or fusing genres together. Nothing really to add to that, but I was just wondering if you guys were expecting this to be... more of a traditional fighter game, or, a action-adventure game similar to, the ones I referenced.
I was more expecting the side-scrolling element, just because, I'd never heard of this game, and it just sort of seemed like, oh, here's another side-scroller, but here's another Kung Fu-flavored one. And in the beginning, it sort of fell into that expectation, and I guess it would have more so if I didn't read the manual and read about what I was going to get into next. But I was originally thinking this would be just that one thing.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, even though, at the beginning they do allude to the fact that you're, like, headed to a tournament. So I sort of, at that point, was wondering what this tournament was going to be, but I'll say I was expecting it to be a tournament where you take everything you've done in the side-scrolling levels, and now it's like an evolution of it or another version of that. But really, I was surprised that there's just two kind of gameplay styles that aren't really that related.
Yeah, they're actually so far apart in terms of like play style and just the flow of the game, that they actually make it a point to, when you get to the fighting part of it, to be like, actually, you have no idea what to do. We need to give you a tutorial to explain what to do. And they didn't do that at all for the side-scrolling action part, right? They weren't like, hey, we should teach people about, like, you
punching
need to
and
hit
kicking.
These. Right. No, or just like, what you need to do, right? Of like, you need to hit these tiki things, or I can't remember what they are, but like these boxes, and then things will appear from them, or you need to defeat like all 5 bosses. Now, granted, that stuff's probably covered in the manual. I didn't look at it, but it's just a weird flow of something to be like, yeah, we understand that everybody knows how to do this part of the game, and we're going to give you that first. But then when we get to the other element of our game, we actually have to like stop and teach you with an actual controller on screen just the idea of doing
that.
This.
Was crazy. Like, this is the first like on-screen tutorial I've ever seen, I think, and it's done pretty fluidly. I know that it stops the action in its tracks, but I mean, like, it's intuitive. It definitely is more useful than a poorly worded manual entry, and you just sort of have to parse the rest yourself. Like, I thought that was done relatively well.
Yeah, I really wanted to kind of praise that element of this game as well, because it does feel like, for the most part, if not always, we've so far had to go back to the manual anytime we were like confused about the controls or there was some new gameplay element introduced. And like you said, Sean, sometimes that didn't translate perfectly to exactly, you had to sort of figure it out. And this did a really good job of teaching you, not only teaching you exactly how to do it, but like, there's a little bit of I don't want to say a learning curve. It's a pretty simple concept, but like at least a learning curve is in terms of your muscle memory. And it gives you a good, like the tutorial doesn't just teach you exactly how to do it. It gives you some time to learn it, so you feel like when you're done with that tutorial, you've kind of upped your skill a little bit to where you feel like you're equipped to go on and actually fight the tournaments. So I thought they did a good job with that.
Yeah, and I think it also just shows how new of an idea this is to like video games, that they felt the need to stop all the gameplay and action and progress and be like, here's how you're going to do these things. And that's really the biggest takeaway for me, was just that it hasn't been perfected yet how we do like one-on-one combat, right? Like we've seen wrestling games handle it one way, other games handle it via like menu systems. Nobody's quite figured out yet like the idea of you and your opponent having different sets of moves and each having like a health bar that corresponds. But I think this comes really close. I actually question, like they came so close, but they didn't figure it out, right? It's like some people will be disappointed, but I don't think this is like the wrong way to go either. So if you don't mind, I'm going to actually like push aside the side-scrolling levels for right now, even though the game starts with them, because I feel like that's just something easier to get into. I want to talk about the fighting game levels, because since this isn't your traditional fighting game, you have these targets that indicate what kind of button input you need to do. What did you guys think of that idea versus, traditional Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat style games where, you're in complete control of the inputs that you do, but you kind of need to like memorize these awesome inputs, whereas this game says like you don't really have control over what input you're going to do next, but you have to remember these patterns, and then by doing these things with the limited controller that you have, right, you only have the D-pad and the 2 buttons, you'll be able to do more awesome things than you'd be able to if we just gave you 1-button punches, 1-button kicks.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely approaching like the quote-unquote fighting game from a different angle than we're used to. It's almost more like a Simon Says slash rhythm game sort of thing, where these targets appear on your body and your opponent's body, and they sort of telegraph where you should hit as like a weak spot, or where your opponent is going to hit that you need to defend. And I think it still works. It works pretty well as an idea. And then when you're actually fighting and you sort of get into that rhythm, like even the idea of like a combo sort of shows itself. It's a very simple one, but like even your standard inputs are kind of a combo, because you have to target like these different parts of your opponent's body, but then you get slightly more complex ones where like with your sort of grab them and throw them over your head sort of thing. So there's a lot of elements that sort of will evolve as the fighting game genre evolves, but also stuff that'll just completely get thrown away, like this whole like they show you a target and you have to hit it sort of thing. But it's still very unique.
Yeah, I thought the target thing it helped to bring a lot to the table, but there was also, I think it compromised a lot of other things too. So for one, because they're trying to kind of, I feel like, capture the spirit of a martial arts, sparring one-on-one match, this target system kind of gives you control over things like, okay, where do I want my guard to be? Do I want to be blocking high, middle, low? Where do I want to kick? Like, where is he blocking? Where it's like, I guess that translates decently to what it would be like to be in an actual like martial arts fight, where you're thinking of like, okay, he's dropped his guard, I go for the head. Okay, his guard's up, sweep the legs, whatever. So that's nice. And as just the way that it presents itself, where these targets appear and you have to hit the target as it appears, or you see where they're aiming and you have to block before they hit you. It lends itself to having a nice fluid, what feels like a martial arts style fight, as opposed to just like punch, 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 punch. It's like a little more of like a dance, and that's nice. I think that works, and you really get into a rhythm as you're playing. What I think it loses is that even though you get more control over exactly where you're hitting and stuff, you lose pretty much all agency in the battle. It's all about doing what it says is the best move at the right time. It's all about timing. It is almost more of a rhythm game in the sense that it's just kind of a series of almost quick time events.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you described it as a dance, like it those targets really just are your choreography. Like, yeah, you're not making any strategic decision about I should bait and then hit. You're just sort of doing what the game tells you to do.
Exactly. And I think that for me over time started to slowly outweigh the appreciation I had for how cool it felt to fight this way. After a while, I was like, okay, I'm kind of bored now. I'm just doing what the game tells me. The game is playing me.
Whoa.
The fighting game that we've also compared to a rhythm game, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, that game, completely different graphical style that they were able to pull it off. But like, imagine if instead of these like great animation tells that you have to look out for and, subtle tricks in the audience or flashes or stuff like that. Imagine if instead they just like had a big dot over the fist when it was about to like punch. This way you knew to dodge, right? It's like, it's kind of like that in a way, but I don't know how, because this is, a 2D from the side action fighting game, I don't know how they would be able to communicate like such great tells in the combat that it wouldn't just be reduced to the kind of combat that you get during the side-scrolling action stages, where you're just like constantly just hitting punch and kick and hoping your punch and kicks outweigh the opponents, and it just becomes like a spamming battle. So because they had to come up with some kind of system to like create a more nuanced fighting system where it's actually like, hey, you're responsible for both blocking and attacking, dependent on what we show you on screen. I'm not sure how else they could have pulled that off, but at the same time, I'm not ready to applaud that either, because I do agree that, you are just answering their commands, but also like you're less inclined to just like experiment in general, not even because you can't, but like, I don't know about you guys, I didn't even think I could move. Like, I found out later on you can move, but like I couldn't figure out a reason for why I'd really want to move. There's no like grand reason for for space control or anything like that. Like, you still have to, when the dots finally do show up in the locations they do, you still have to answer the same call.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of movement, like, yeah, it's not really well utilized, because there's like, you can dodge out of the way of certain attacks that have enough like lead time. But the thing about this game is I agree with you. Like, this was put into place because having it be more of like a standard fighter in like the standard word that we're thinking of. Like the controls just aren't there. Like, even though you're being told what to do, they still kind of feel sticky. And I don't know I guess it's kind of subjective. Maybe you guys didn't feel that way, but to me, they felt kind of sticky. Because the other solution, like just playing Armchair Designer, that I can think of to allow for more information to be given to you that isn't just an explicit target, could be solved by just zooming in more, and that would make movement even less important, jumping and stuff less important, and so that like these larger sprites that you're seeing for yourself and your opponent could have more telegraphing information, or just as a tell, work as a tell, or something along those lines. But I understand that, like, if this is how the game feels in its current state, then I don't think that just blowing it up would make it feel any better. So I don't know. I guess I'm just sort of rambling about like the wider design of the game in terms of like why they went that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, though, the idea of blowing it up and then taking away the actual like icons on the screen and making the tells actual tells, right? Because ever since Mike brought up Punch Out, I've been thinking about that, where I'm like, why do I like Punch Out so much better than I like this? And because it is technically, if you really want to read into it, it is an indicator on the screen that tells you what to do. But there's something, one, about the immersion of something like Punch Out, where it's like you feel like you're actually fighting that person, and two, it's a little more complex than just the dot telling you where to hit. So it's like, it's a little more like real life decision making based on what you're seeing. While obviously it's still a pattern, but like so are almost every boss battle in any modern video game you play is all pattern recognition. And I think that it's like Punch Out or something like what you're describing, Sean, about a possible way to do this is getting closer to just complex patterns instead of a pattern of blue dot, red dot, where it's just like literally press this button now, press this button now. That's what makes this feel to me like I'm not thinking, The game is thinking for me.
Yeah, it's important to remember that the dot here isn't just telling you like, oh, hit their stomach or hit them in the head. It's telling you, just based on the way that the game, sets up the tutorial for you too, it's telling you which buttons to press on your controller. So you don't even get the choice now of like, they're saying go for the head and I want to do a strong kick. Like, no, you have to do the same exact inputs that a dot on that person's head means versus a dot on your head. Like, they're deciding what controller input you do, so you're just reacting. And even in the, as the game continues, any additional things they add to the fighting, like they add some additional special moves, and eventually there's an elimination round and stuff like that. It's actually all just story progress. It doesn't actually enhance the actual fights any further because specifically for the elimination round, right, they show you this great like bracket of best of 8 or whatever, right, and like you move up in the tournament, and that's great and compelling as like, wow, I got to make my way through this. But every match in this game is an elimination round thing where like if you lose and that's game over.
It's just window dressing the whole
right, exactly, it's
tree.
Just dressing it up. But you could argue that the special moves are just doing that too, really. They're not enhanced. Like, there's that one where you do like a flying kick in the air where you're spinning around and then you come down and hit them. That doesn't actually change anything in the game other than now this technique, but you can still only use it when we call for it, Yeah. And I think another important thing to mention with these dots is since it's reactionary, it's kind of demanding on the reactionary side. I don't think it's like so fast that it's impossible by any means, and you don't want to be perfect, right? That'd be kind of a boring game too. You want to make a mistake every now and again, so you don't want it to be like you have all the time in the world. However, the amount of times that you have to, react to these dots on an individual fight level is just like, that's a lot in itself. But then to just continue to have to be on edge for this kind of thing, like, I don't know if this dot system is really pulling off the longer you play it. I don't know if you guys feel that way about the reaction times, but it's just like as soon as you strike or block what they want you to do, there's immediately a new dot on screen requiring the next set of inputs.
Yeah. And like that again, like I think the way we've been pitching this game, it sort of sounds like it plays itself and it's super easy. And what you just said is why it's not, because while it is more just a test of reaction time and not so much fighting strategy, that is still very challenging. One could argue that it's not a very engaging way to be challenging, but you're right. Like as the fights progress, it becomes a lot harder to sort of keep up and to dodge as well as you should. So yeah, I agree. It's demanding.
Yeah, I think the other thing that makes it that still makes it challenging is that. So I know I'm going to get this backwards or somehow messed up, but something to the effect of when you're defending, you have to just press the D-pad button in the direction you're defending, but when you're attacking, you have to press the D-pad plus A in the direction you want to attack on them. which sounds pretty simple, but it does become a little bit of like a pat your head, rub your stomach situation sometimes where you're like, wait, what am I doing? So like you get into this rhythm and it feels really good. And then when you slip out like once, suddenly you're like, like you're kind of like caught on your back foot for a second. And that part, that element of it is cool at first, but it's just, I don't think it's interesting enough to hold my attention for the amount of time it wants me to do it.
Yeah, it's kind of necessary for them to break up these fights with these side-scrolling levels, because otherwise that would be the whole game, right? Is just constantly like how much better, I think Sean put it perfectly when he said it's like Simon Says, because how long can you keep up with that? Like how long is that interesting? Even if the animations change, if the core concept remains the same forever, it just becomes harder to go on.
Right.
Did you guys try the pause strategy at all?
The pause strategy.
Sounds like a strategy I would like, but
I'm surprised, Joe, that you didn't know about it. But in order to really make my way through this game, and just keep my interest levels up, I found on Game FAQs that there is a whole strategy to the fighting based around pausing, and that is that as soon as you defend or attack, the dot on screen, because the next one pops up, you can actually pause the screen. The dot remains, and now the next queued up
that
attack.
Sounds so fun.
No, it's not fun. It's not fun. I'm saying in order for me to continue on with the game, in the later levels and everything, it's a strategy that is not fun at all, but I also just can't believe that they would allow the dot to remain on the pause. Like, it seems like such an easy thing to just, like, if you pause, just, like, remove even just that one sprite or just cover it, right? Like, have the pause thing be, like, enough to cover the field of action or something. Like, I think it's incredibly tedious, don't get me wrong. Like, it's definitely, like, the game isn't encouraging it by any means. But, if anything, it draws out, like...
I just can't believe people, like, played like that enough to consider it, like, a valid strategy.
Yes, I know, yeah. Well, if you think about it, though, right, it's like, if you're trying to beat every NES game, sooner or later you're going to come up with ways to cheese any particular game that you're struggling with, right? Like, we've figured out all sorts of things, and I'm not encouraging this strategy by any means, because, like I said, it adds actually so much extra time to these fights, and it doesn't enhance the game at all, because, again, you're just saying now, like, oh, cool, now I know I have to do, D-pad up and A, and that doesn't, like, to me, that sounds like nonsense. So, not something
Agreed.
I would recommend, but just a funny exploit, because it completely removes any actual challenge. It's almost like having an invincibility code built into the game.
Yeah, it's kind of like, if you take away the not live, but the action version, the action element to this, you're literally just putting in inputs every couple seconds. You're like, all right, time to put in that next input, unpause, put in the input, pause. All right, what's next? Like, put in this input. You're not playing a game anymore. It's not even, it's like worse than other types of cheating, because you're literally not even playing a game. You're just every couple seconds putting in a new input that the game tells you to do.
You're playing Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes with the game.
Yeah, exactly. Except you can't really lose.
Right. All right, I feel like that's enough on the fighting game section, and we can move on to the side-scrolling levels. As I threw out a throwback episode to Kid Nicky Radical Ninja, do you guys even remember that game?
Nope.
Yeah, that was the one you could go in different order of the levels, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, so don't remember that part, but just the look and feel
right.
of the side-scrolling action of it is what I remember most from this. But these side-scrolling levels are they're wraparounds. Like you'll just constantly, it's like you're going on a treadmill through the same set over and over and over again. And there are bosses. I don't know why they call them bosses. They might as well just be like enemies with slightly more health is what I would refer to them as. But the screen goes like dark for them, which is kind of cool. It's like, it makes it feel like a little bit of a bigger fight. But these are the things that you experience in these side-scrolling levels. Is they're short, small stages where you have to kind of figure out where the bosses are, defeat all of them, where the hidden items are, and then lastly, once you've defeated all 5 bosses, where's the key in the stage so that I can unlock the door.
Well, all right. Let me give a little brief rundown of this,
please.
So there's no hidden anything. Like there's some hidden like health packs and like mini power-ups in the statues that are littered across the field, but the thing that triggers each like actual power-up and finding the key to exit the side-scrolling level is just kill 5 enemies in a row. You kill 5 enemies in a row, and a boss comes out, and then you kill the boss, and you get the little piece of, I don't know, kanji or whatever the Chinese equivalent is, and then you get your little power-up or key, and then you move on to the next one. You kill 5 more enemies in a row, and you fight the thing again. You do it 5 times. And it sounds like it takes a while, but it doesn't, because the game is incredibly simple and easy in this mode. And then you just rinse and repeat until you have everything, and then you just go to the door, which is clearly marked as the door, and you go to the next tournament. And look, my biggest question about this part is why they even bother contextualizing the things that you're picking up as power-ups, because you have to get you have to get them all in order, and then the key, in order to progress, and you don't get to keep anything. Like, as soon as you get to the fight, like you are now in competition mode, and like what you did in the side scroller doesn't really matter. So it just felt tacked on, like just to do what you described earlier, Mike, of like just give you a break from the more strenuous one-on-one fighting. It just seems half-baked the whole time.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it was killing 5 enemies that triggered the boss to come. When I did quickly realize that I didn't have to actually move anywhere in the level. I was like, if I just stand here and fight for a minute, I thought it was time-based or whatever, but if I just stand here and fight for a minute, the boss will show up. So I guess I was killing 5 enemies. But that also kind of made me think, what's the point of this whole level? I don't have to go anywhere. I can just stand right here and everything I need will come to me. I gotta find the door, but that's fine. So, it's not that big of a level. It's usually the door is usually pretty early on. And then there's like all this other stuff that they put in these levels that you don't need to go to.
But Joe, just even like now knowing that I didn't have to explore the level, I prefer the way you guys were playing it. Like, I think that it's such a chore to play as this character in these side-scrolling levels. Maybe specifically just because you have to hit the up on the D-pad to jump, and I just thought we were done with those days. But it's so bad here. It's frustrating because the jump, it's like you definitely can't do multiple inputs at once for whatever it's worth anyway. But something about moving forward and also having to jump, because you have to, like, so you're holding right on the D-pad and it can't register moving right and jumping at the same time, but there's pitfalls and there's platforms to get onto. That just made everything like infinitely worse. And if I would have known that I didn't have to move from where my comfort zone was and I could just stay there and have everybody come to me, I would have preferred that, because the worst part about this part of the game, the platforming, if you will, like just moving from the different layers and things that you experience throughout the level, doing that over and over and over again too, like, because it's just a short loop before you go back to the beginning, doing that over and over again. I wish I would have just not had to have dealt with that, or just like, put us in a tournament area, right? But this time it's not with the martial arts rules, right? Now you're out there in the wild, so you can just attack the way that you attack. It's like, don't give me free range to explore this thing, because I'm not interested in exploring it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna clarify that I think you only prefer it that way because you didn't like the experience at all. I think if like it was an engaging part of the game and you found out there's a huge shortcut, that would actually bum you out. But yeah. Just want to clarify that.
Yeah, but that's an interesting point too. Of not even that I didn't enjoy it. It's an interesting point to mention that the whole game is just kind of rules based on things, and we continue to find ways to just exploit that very obviously. Like, they never actually designed anything, to your point, Sean, of that it's just kill 5 enemies and then the boss appears, and there's no like hidden area to find a boss or hidden place to find a key, because it's just all like set up for you in this structure over and over again. Whether it's the fighting levels or the exploration levels, you can just figure out like the fastest way to get through all this stuff, or the most efficient way for, your playstyle to get through all this stuff without having to actually play the game much at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it was about the boss fight. I don't know why we're still calling them boss fights, but like I don't know what it was, but like they weren't challenging. Maybe because you have like a good amount of health, and if you do explore, you can find I don't know, I guess they're soda bottles or milk bottles. You can find easy ways to replenish your energy back to full. So I never really felt like I was in danger during these stages. I was definitely losing more health in the fighting game stages, because even in the boss fights, you're encouraged to just like, I don't know, take a little chunk of damage here and there just to get up close and personal with them, right? Like just take them out quicker than trying to like block their attacks or dodge their attacks and then go in for the strike. It's like, if you can take them out in 4 rapid strikes, you're better off taking a little bit of health off and just getting rid of them early.
Yeah, because you don't carry your health into your next like competition, and the only thing that separates these bosses from standard enemies is that they aren't just mindlessly walking forward. They've got projectiles and they reposition. But like by the time you fight these things, at least the later ones, like you will probably have come across a power up that gives you a projectile, or a little force field that you can just stand in front of them and it'll kill them in like seconds. So it's not very well balanced. It's just like you can easily cheese this section, so it may as well not exist.
Yeah, you know how like we talk about sometimes difficulty in a game coming down to like, was the bad guy, was the boss well designed, or was it like, oh, he just has so much health? Like they made it harder by just giving him a bunch of health or making him do a ton of damage. It's almost like artificially inflating the difficulty of a boss battle. And I think that this game is like the reverse of that. It's easy, but not because you can do a bunch of cool shit or you get all these cool power-ups. It's just easy because you have way more health and do more damage. Or your health doesn't go that you have just way higher defense and do more damage. So you can just kind of run in and like, and just sort of kamikaze the enemy, and like they're gonna die before you die. All 5 of them or whatever before you lose all of your health. And then like you said, your health doesn't carry over to the next fighting tournament round. Like nothing about the side-scrolling round is in any way connected to the tournament round. They're 2 separate games on the same cartridge.
Now, imagine playing these 2 separate games and doing them, one after the other, without much really changing between the 2 modes. When you get to the end of the game, it does that classic, you're not done. You actually have to go through the whole game again. This time, instead of just finding the keys and stuff, now you have to find the 4 crystal balls. And they made it so this way the crystal balls cannot be found, obviously, in your first playthrough. You have to be on the second playthrough. I didn't bother with this, but from what I can understand, the game isn't any more challenging other than the amount of health that comes off. So granted, that is a bigger deal, right? But that's not the kind of modifier I like. Now, I'm not sure what else they would have done. I'm not saying like give me new levels or anything, because they would have just ultimately been the same thing. But I don't think there's enough incentive there if you go through all this to do it again, just like how I kind of didn't feel Ghosts and Goblins earned it either, right? Like it's such a challenging game, and then they say do it all again to get the true ending. I don't know if if these games that change so little other than just like, great, you did it once, prove you're really good and do it twice. It's like, no, I proved I was really good when I did it the first time, right? Like, this is your game. This is all you had to offer. You're not offering me anything new in the second playthrough. I don't know.
Yeah,
it bothers me a little bit.
I agree. I mean, I think that this trend, that I don't know if it's really a trend, but the thing that this game does only really works in like the more modern like roguelike games where that's just built into like the gameplay itself. Whereas in any standard like get to the end, fight the final boss and win game, it's just a cop out and an obvious time extension tool. So I don't think, yeah, you're right. Ghosts and Goblins did not earn it. I don't think any game has earned it that operates like that.
Yeah, there would need to be something there would need to be a new game plus almost. You know, there would need to be something in it where it's like, oh, I got to keep all these power-ups I had, or like some new, I mean, I know we said that this is maybe like a big ask, but like new levels or something new to do if you're going to tell me that I can't beat the game unless I do it all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm totally a fan of new game plus stuff. I'm not expecting that in these NES
but
games.
You got the true ending that first time.
Yeah, I don't think like that's lame. I think that's a fun way for someone who's really good at the game to experience the game all over again with all the stuff that they acquired. Like, you know, even if you don't do it that way, whatever you choose to do, I think like that way of fleshing it out is a lot better than saying you didn't really beat the game but offering no changes. I think about Super Mario Galaxy has a thing where, like, you know, you have to collect the first 120 stars in that game, and then you can unlock Luigi, and you play the same exact game again, except for he just has a slightly higher jump. That's the only difference. But they never said you didn't beat the game. So yeah, it's not quite like new game plus territory because it's such a small change, but like no one's forcing you to be like, well, if you want the real ending, you know, you got to play the whole game as Luigi again. It's like, that's what I feel like this game should have done, is like they should have given everybody the ending, but now you've unlocked the more difficult mode, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's the only change, is like now you can play on the harder difficulty and prove your skill rather than prove you beat the game. Like, I did prove I beat the game.
Yeah, it should be more like incentive to play it again rather than just saying, nope, you're not done if you didn't beat it. Like,
not enough carrot.
Give people a reason to start over and say it again.
Not enough carrot, too much stick.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to shout out for the like setting of the game and stuff like that is that the locations do change, and even the fighting part of the game does change locations too, to the point where at a certain part of the game you're facing boxers, and I thought that was like, even though they don't act any differently or anything, I thought that was like a neat change, right? Something that you would see in a an anime or a manga or something like that, a karate guy taking on a bunch of boxers or something like that. You're in a wrestling ring. I thought that was a fun addition to this, like being in the city or being in the forest. They didn't get too lazy and just all make it like the same location all the time, and the only thing that changes is the color.
Yeah, I think the game has good presentation for the most part, and just the fact that there are different arenas is enough for me, to be honest. But yeah, there's a lot more polish to this game than there is substance.
For the sequels and spin-offs, Flying Dragon actually does have it's a whole like series actually. In Japan, I think it's called Hiro no Ken, and here it's Flying Dragon. But Flying Dragon had a prequel first called Shanghai Kid, only in the arcades, and it's just the fighting game part of it, if I recall correctly. So this is just kind of a spiritual successor for the consoles with Flying Dragon, but then the other games all get the Flying Dragon title, and there's a bunch of them, so I'm not really going to get into it too much. But interesting observation, when Street Fighter finally does come out, after that, all the fighting elements of their games, whether it's for Super Nintendo or N64, like, they just rip off the Street Fighter format. They completely abandon their dot system and, trying to expand upon that with like a better understanding of like what fighting games are now. And they say, no, Instead, just make it exactly like Street Fighter. Just if that's what's working, let's just copy that. Let's surrender our idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I haven't played these games, but I want to say that it's less like, let's just copy Street Fighter, and more like this is now the genre codifier, and what we were doing was wrong.
Yeah, Street Fighter figured it out. I mean, I don't think that should mean that that's the only way to do it, but that was like, at the time, that's like, okay, well, that's the only way that anyone's figured out. Are we going to take a risk and try something crazy and new and have it most likely be not as good? Or do we just stick with the formula?
Yeah, it's an interesting observation, because I don't want to get into too much of other fighting games, but Mortal Kombat is still kind of just Street Fighter, but with more gore and some, interesting weapon choices, right? Like it doesn't change too much other than like adding a fatality at the end, which is a neat new addition, but it's a small addition in the grand scheme of things. Whereas you have games like Tekken that actually do learn something from Street Fighter, but say like, well, what if you could actually move around in the space, like what if that was the change? And so you could go either way with it, right? But ultimately, yeah, once Street Fighter lays down the groundwork for like how to do these kinds of games, it would be silly to keep the dot system in and just make this a reaction based game, because essentially, all video games are, on one level or another are reaction based games. It's just they usually don't tell you what inputs to do next.
And that being said, though, like things like Tekken and I guess not so much Soul Calibur, but definitely with Tekken, like that is an evolution that was only made possible by new technology,
right?
And Virtua Fighter, for that matter.
Yeah, but interesting that Street Fighter continues to avoid that, right?
Yeah,
like they say like, no, that's Tekken, or whatever, Soul Calibur, that's those games, and we do ours this way. And then you have like King of Fighters, following in line with that too, and saying, all right, we're gonna do something our way that we always do at the end of an episode, and that is the essential games list. Sean, your vote for Flying Dragon: The Secret Scroll.
Obviously what I've been saying has kind of tipped everyone off to how I'm going to vote here. It's definitely unique, and it's building up to something in terms of like this proto fighting game. But it's got too much flab, and it's just not all that enjoyable after a little while. With the whole, Simon Says, monkey see, monkey do, punch me in the face. How about you? Not essential.
Joe, monkey see, monkey do. How do you vote?
Well, speaking of that, I guess it's time that we let the listeners know that when we vote for the essential games list, Mike, you'll say Joe, and then Mike holds up a red target if he wants me to vote it essential, and a blue target if he wants me to vote it not essential. So I'm just waiting for that target to be held up, because we have no agency. So Mike has held up.
Show you're held against your will.
Yeah, Mike has held up the blue target, which means I'm going to vote it not essential. And I think that, in all seriousness, I think that the only thing personally for me worth talking about this game is the fighting section. The side-scrolling section is just another side-scrolling section, and it's got plenty of flaws, and it doesn't do enough. Here I am talking about it, even though I said it's not worth talking about. But the fighting section, it did hold my interest at first, and I was like, oh, this is cool, and it's fun to get into that rhythm. It's just not enough to hold my interest for the amount it wants you to the amount of levels or the amount of battles it wants you to face using these reaction commands. It just needs something more to me, so I'm saying not essential.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to the blue dot instead of the...
Always.
Yeah. And, it's always the blue dot, actually. Whenever anybody says any game, I say not essential. That's my new thing. I'm gatekeeping the essential games list. It is perfect, and we will not be adding any other games to it, including Flying Dragon: The Secret Scroll. No, we're just happy that Flying Dragon: The Secret Scroll doesn't even have a chance, right? Like, thank goodness Sean and Joe voted correctly, so that this way it doesn't fall on me. But no, it's not going on the essential games list. Will something go on the essential games list in 2022? I don't know. It remains to be seen, right? We're going through quite an onslaught of games here, but we'll see, because for all I know, a game that already we already played is on the essential games list. But I don't know that yet because I'm confused about time and space.
Huh.
If you don't want to be confused about time and space, all you need to know is that new episodes every Friday of this show. That's right. If you're surprised by that, I'm a little worried because it's always been that way. But next week, we're going to have Jordan versus Bird one-on-one. And if you don't know who Jordan or Bird is, don't worry. We're going to explain that in the episode. We have you covered on all things Jordan, Bird, and what one-on-one means as well. We will go in depth on those topics, just like we always do on Nostalgia. For more nostalgia, visit www.nostalgicast.com. If you want access to exclusive stuff, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/nostalgia. Or if you just want to talk to us about nostalgia-related things, tweet at us at nostalgicast.
Wait, guys. We didn't talk about the story of the game. Do we think that's worth talking about?
I don't think so.